The handcuffs clicked at 11:58 p.m. Not because she'd done anything wrong, but because Seon Jae-won had made a decision. Cold, calculated, and absolute. And in his world, decisions didn't come with apologies. They came with consequences. Before we go further, if stories about power, pride, and the moment a man realizes he's been wrong his entire life move something in you, you belong here. Hit that subscribe button because the people who find this channel never want to leave. The Gangnam district of Seoul breathed differently after midnight. The neon signs still burned, pink and gold, and electric blue, but the energy beneath them shifted. The tourists retreated to their hotels. The street vendors folded their carts. And the people who truly owned this city, they emerged. Zara Osei had been in Seoul for 11 months. Long enough to learn that the city had layers, like sediment compressed over centuries, and that most foreigners only ever saw the surface. She'd come as a forensic accountant contracted through an international financial monitoring firm, tasked with tracing capital flow irregularities through a web of entertainment companies, real estate holdings, and import-export fronts that stretched from Incheon all the way to Busan. She was good at her job, disturbingly good, and someone had noticed. She was walking back from a late dinner, alone, as she often was, earbuds in, a container of tteokbokki balanced in one hand and her work tablet in the other, when the black SUVs appeared. 3 of them.
No sirens. No lights.
Just the low, predatory purr of engines that cost more than most people's apartments. They didn't stop near her. They stopped around her. 4 men stepped out before the vehicles had fully halted. Broad shoulders, dark suits, earpieces curling behind their jawlines. 2 of them she'd never seen before. The 3rd she recognized vaguely from the lobby of the Myri Tower building, a financial complex she'd been frequenting for weeks. The fourth was giving orders. He was taller than she'd expected. That was the first thing her mind registered. Not the severity of his expression, not the authority that seemed to radiate from him like a field rather than a posture, but simply that he was tall. Lean in the way that suggested discipline rather than genetics. His coat was charcoal gray, unbuttoned, moving slightly in the October wind. His hair was dark and pushed back. His age was difficult to determine, somewhere in the geography between 32 and 40, where certain men lived indefinitely. His name, though she didn't know it yet, was Seon Jae-won, and he looked at her the way men like him looked at problems. Zara Osei, one of the men said. Not a question. She pulled one earbud out.
Slow.
Deliberate. That depends on who's asking. A pause. Then, you'll need to come with us. She looked at each of them in sequence. Her expression didn't shift. I don't think I will. That surprised them. She could see it, just a flicker, a fractional adjustment in the way they held themselves. They were accustomed to compliance. Fear, at minimum. She offered neither. Jae-won stepped forward then. When he spoke, his English was precise and unaccented, the kind that came from years of international business rather than a classroom. Ms. Osei, this isn't a request and it isn't an arrest, not yet. But it can become one within the next 60 seconds if you prefer formality. 60 seconds, she repeated. You timed that. I time everything. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she put her tteokbokki container carefully into her bag, tucked her tablet under her arm, replaced her earbud, and then removed it again.
Fine, she said.
But I want it noted that I'm coming voluntarily.
Noted, he said.
Though his tone made clear he found the distinction irrelevant. The SUV's interior smelled like leather and bergamot. She sat between 2 of the men she didn't recognize, hands folded in her lap, watching the city blur past the tinted windows. No one spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable for them. It was professional. These were men trained to occupy silence like a room. But Zara had grown up the middle child of 5 in Accra. Silence, for her, had always been something to fill with observation. She catalogued everything. The route, she was memorizing it. The driver's habits. The faint sound of what she believed was a police band frequency coming from a receiver near the front console. The way Jae-won, seated in the front passenger seat, hadn't turned around once. He wasn't watching her. He didn't need to. They arrived at a building she hadn't been to before, not a police precinct, not a government facility. It was a privately owned structure in a part of the district that felt deliberately uninteresting. The kind of building designed to be forgotten. Inside, marble floors, indirect lighting, and the particular hush of a place where important things happened quietly. She was taken to a room on the fourth floor. Glass walls on two sides, a table, two chairs, water in a crystal glass she didn't touch. A camera in the corner that she acknowledged with a direct look before sitting down. Jae-won entered alone. He sat across from her, placed a folder on the table, and opened it without preamble. Inside, photographs, documents, printouts of financial transactions. Her work, her actual work. You've been moving through restricted financial architecture, he said, using clearance codes that belonged to a firm that was dissolved 14 months ago. Zara looked at the documents, then at him. The firm was dissolved. The clearance codes were reassigned to our monitoring division. That's a matter of record. Not according to the Korean Financial Intelligence Unit. Then someone at the KFIU has incomplete information. His eyes moved to her face, not with anger, but with the focused attention of someone calibrating. Are you aware of what you've been tracing? Capital irregularities. You're aware, he said slowly, that the capital irregularities you've been tracing belong, in significant part, to entities under my protection. There it was. Not a government operation. Not law enforcement. His protection. She held his gaze. Then perhaps you should be concerned about why those irregularities exist. The room went very still. Jae-won closed the folder. You'll remain here tonight. Am I under arrest? A pause that lasted exactly long enough to mean something. You're under advisement. That's not a legal category. No, he agreed. It's a personal one. He stood, gathered the folder, and moved toward the door. At the threshold, he paused, back still turned, and said, "The water is clean. I'd drink it if I were you. It's going to be a long night." Then he left. And Zara Osei, alone in a glass room at midnight in a city that wasn't hers, looked at the camera in the corner and smiled. She didn't sleep. Not because she was afraid, though a more reasonable person might have been, but because her mind didn't work that way under pressure. It accelerated. It sorted. It cross-referenced. By 1 a.m., she had mentally reconstructed the last 3 months of her investigation and identified, with reasonable confidence, exactly which thread she'd pulled that had led to this room. It was a company called Chongwol Holdings. On paper, Chongwol was a mid-tier entertainment investment group, funding a handful of music labels, 2 theatrical production companies, and a chain of premium karaoke venues across Seoul and Busan. Clean. Ordinary. The kind of entity that appeared in financial records the way furniture appeared in a room. Present but unremarkable. Except Chongwol's quarterly disbursements didn't align with its declared revenue streams. The gaps weren't large enough to trigger automated flagging, but they were consistent. And consistency, in Zara's experience, was always the signature of intentional design rather than error. Someone had built those gaps deliberately. Someone very careful. She had been 2 weeks away from filing her preliminary findings. Now she was sitting in a glass room, and the man who had put her here had just confirmed, without meaning to, that those findings were not only accurate, they were threatening something significant. At 2:15 a.m., the door opened again. Not Jae-won this time. A woman entered, mid-40s, close-cropped hair, wearing a tailored blazer over a silk top. She carried 2 containers of food and set one in front of Zara, without asking. "You haven't eaten," the woman said. Zara looked at the container. Doenjang jjigae, fermented soybean soup, still steaming. "How do you know?" "The tteokbokki in your bag hasn't been opened." The woman sat down across from her unhurried.
I'm Beksorim.
"I handle various things for the Seon organization." "Various things," Zara echoed. "Logistics. Communications. Occasionally, situations like this one. Situations where you've detained someone illegally and now need to manage the optics." Soram's expression was unreadable, but her eyes were sharp. Situations where a misunderstanding has created unnecessary tension. Is that what this is? A misunderstanding? Soram picked up her own chopsticks. "Eat, Ms. Osei. The food is safe." I made it myself, which means no one else touched it, and before you ask, yes, I anticipated that you'd want that information. Despite everything, Zara almost smiled. She picked up the spoon. They ate in a silence that was, somehow, different from the silence of the car ride. Less performative. More honest. He doesn't usually come himself, Sorum said eventually. When something needs to be handled quietly, he sends people. The fact that he came tonight. She paused. It means he takes what you found seriously. He should. More than that. Sorum set down her chopsticks. It means he's unsettled. And Jae-won unsettled is a rarer thing than most people realize. Zara studied her. Why are you telling me this? Sorum looked back at her, steady, direct, carrying the weight of someone who had spent years operating in spaces where honesty was a luxury rarely afforded. Because I've worked for that man for 9 years. And in 9 years, I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you when you got out of that car. How did he look at me? Sorum was quiet for a moment. Like you were a variable he hadn't accounted for. Jae-won, meanwhile, was 4 floors up. His office occupied the entire top level of the building, not ostentatiously designed, but precise in the way that reflected the mind that inhabited it. No unnecessary objects. A single large desk. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the district. A wall of monitors, most currently dark. 1 shelf of books, not for display, but worn at the spines in ways that suggested genuine reading. He stood at the window, hands behind his back, looking at the city. He was thinking about her expression when he'd told her she was under advisement. Not fear. Not indignation, or rather, not only indignation. Something more structured. The look of a person who had been placed in a complicated situation and was already 3 moves ahead in their response. He'd met a great many intelligent people in his life. Intelligence in his world was common enough. The industry required it. But there were different categories of intelligence. There was the kind that processed quickly, the kind that concealed effectively, the kind that intimidated, and then there was the kind that observed, the rarest kind, the most dangerous kind. He turned from the window and opened the folder again, not the one he'd shown her, but the deeper one. The one his people had compiled over the past 6 weeks as they'd tracked her movements through the financial architecture she'd been mapping. Her credentials were immaculate. Her firm, Osei Global Forensics, named for her late father, he now knew was legitimate, internationally certified, and had a track record of work across 11 countries. She wasn't freelancing. She wasn't being paid by a rival organization. She wasn't, as far as his most thorough investigators could determine, anything other than exactly what she presented herself to be. A forensic accountant.
Doing her job.
And in doing her job, she had uncovered something that Jae-won had spent 4 years carefully constructing, not for the reasons she might assume, but for reasons that were far more complicated than the picture her financial mapping had produced. He sat down, picked up his phone, put it down again. Then he did something he rarely did in professional situations. He second-guessed himself. At 3:30 a.m., a junior member of his staff brought him a single document. An alert that had been triggered through an international monitoring database, one of the passive systems his organization maintained for early warning of regulatory interest. He read it once, then again. Then he stood very quickly and moved toward the stairs. The alert was from Interpol's Financial Crimes Division. They had flagged Chongwol Holdings, not because of Zara's investigation, but because of a parallel inquiry originating from a completely different source. A source inside his own organization. Someone on the inside had been feeding information to an external body for at least 8 months. And Zara Osei's investigation, which he had assumed was the threat, had actually been circling the same corruption from the outside, following the money to the same destination from a completely different direction. She hadn't been a danger to him. She had, without knowing it, been closing in on the people who were. He reached the 4th floor, pushed open the door. Sorum and Zara both looked up. Jae-won stood in the doorway, the Interpol document in his hand, and for the first time in what Sorum would later describe as the entire time she'd known him, he looked uncertain. "I need," he said, measuring each word, "to speak with you." Zara set down her spoon. "I'm aware," she said calmly. "You've just realized you arrested the wrong person." The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. He sat down across from her. No folder this time. No documents between them as armor. Just the table, the low hum of the building's ventilation, and the Interpol alert he placed face up on the surface between them. Zara read it, without touching it. Her eyes moved steadily left to right, down the page. When she finished, she looked up. 8 months, she said. At minimum. And you had no indication. It wasn't a question, but he answered it anyway.
No.
She leaned back in her chair. The overhead light cast precise shadows across her face, strong jaw, eyes that processed faster than most people spoke. She was exhausted. He could see that now. The particular exhaustion that came not from sleeplessness, but from sustained vigilance. She'd been guarding herself since the moment they'd appeared around her on that street, and she hadn't allowed herself to stop once. Who? She asked. I don't know yet. The alert identifies the information source only by a routing signature. It'll take time to trace to a person. But someone inside Chongwol or connected to it has been deliberately constructing the irregularities I've been tracing. Not as a byproduct of normal operation.
As a design.
Yes. To create a paper trail that looks like yours. He was quiet for a moment. A paper trail that is mine in the technical sense. My signatures. My authorization codes. My entities. He paused. But not my actions. Zara absorbed this. She was doing the thing he'd noticed earlier, not reacting immediately but filing information, building architecture. Someone has been using your infrastructure to move money, she said slowly, in a way that mirrors your legitimate operations closely enough to avoid internal detection, but deviates just enough, in the specific places a forensic investigator would look, to appear criminal. Yes. They've been setting you up. Yes. And my investigation was going to reach its conclusions in approximately 2 weeks, he said. At which point you would have filed preliminary findings indicating that the Seon organization was the source of the irregularities. Those findings would have been picked up by the KFIU, combined with whatever the internal source had already delivered to Interpol.
He stopped.
Zara finished the sentence for him. You'd have been finished. The word finish landed in the room like something physical. Jae-won Seon, who had built and maintained one of the most sophisticated private power structures in South Korea over the course of 15 years, had been within 2 weeks of being dismantled. Not by law enforcement. Not by a rival organization. By someone sitting across a table from him every week. Someone who knew exactly how he thought. Someone who had access not just to his operation, but to his trust. The last part was what showed on his face briefly, before he controlled it. But Zara saw it. How large is your inner circle? She asked. Small. Deliberately. Then it's someone close. Yes. She watched him for a moment. Then she said something he didn't expect. I'm sorry. He looked at her. Not for my investigation, she clarified. I stand by my investigation. It was conducted correctly, and I'll continue it. But being betrayed by someone you trusted, she paused. That's a different kind of damage than anything legal or financial. I know what that feels like. The room was quiet. Sorum, who had remained near the door during this exchange, looked at the floor. Jae-won said nothing for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had changed, not softer, exactly, but stripped of the professional distance he'd been maintaining since the car. You came to Seoul alone. Yes. Your firm is named for your father. She went still. You investigated me thoroughly. I investigate everything. He died 3 years ago, she said. He was also an accountant. He spent 20 years trying to trace corruption in institutions that kept destroying his findings. He never got to see any of it land. She looked at the Interpol documents still on the table. I took this contract because some of the capital flows I'm tracing connect back to structures that harmed people in 3 West African countries. Not abstract economic harm. Actual people. Schools that were promised and never built. Medical supply chains that were bled dry. She looked up at him. I don't care about your organization, Mr. Seon. I care about where the money went and who it hurt. Jae-won held her gaze for a long time. Then he said quietly, Changwol's legitimate operations fund 11 community development programs across the Gyeonggi province, 2 free medical clinics, a scholarship program for students from low-income households in Dabong. He paused. That's what I built it for. The financial architecture you've been tracing, the real one, not the fabricated layer, was designed to fund those programs without drawing regulatory attention because the political climate made straightforward charitable structures vulnerable to seizure.
He stopped.
I'm not telling you that to justify anything. I'm telling you because you deserve the full picture. The full picture. Zara looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at him. The fabricated layer, the one being used to frame you, it's been bleeding from the same accounts that fund those programs. Yes. So, whoever is doing this doesn't just want to destroy you legally. They want to destroy what you built. Yes. Something shifted in the room. Not the power dynamic, that was too complicated to shift cleanly, but the nature of the conversation. It was no longer a detained person, and the man who had detained her. It was 2 people who had been, without knowing it, working toward the same truth from opposite ends of the same lie. Zara placed both hands flat on the table. All right, she said. Then we have a problem in common. Dawn came into the building sideways, pale gray light pushing through the floor-to-ceiling windows, catching the edges of things. By 5 a.m., they had been working for over an hour. Zara's tablet was open. Jae-won had brought in 3 additional people, analysts, not enforcers, and Sorum had made coffee without being asked, a detail that seemed to mean something to the people in the room, even if no one named it. The routing signature from the Interpol alert, cross-referenced against Zara's financial mapping, was beginning to point in a direction. Not toward a stranger. Toward someone named Oh Tae-suk. Jae-won's operations director. 11 years. The man who had been present for every significant decision, every expansion, every careful construction of the infrastructure that Jae-won had built with the specific intention of doing good through unconventional means. Tae-suk had known everything, had known what it was for, and had decided, for reasons that weren't yet fully clear, money almost certainly, but there were layers beneath money that were more personal, to dismantle it from the inside. When Jae-won said the name aloud, the room felt different. Sorum set her coffee cup down very carefully. One of the analysts looked at his screen. Zara watched Jae-won's face, not intrusively, but with the attentiveness of someone who understood that this moment mattered. That the name landing in this room, spoken in this way, was not just an investigative development. It was a grief. He didn't collapse. Men like Jae-won didn't do that. But there was something in the set of his jaw, a tightening, then a deliberate release, that said everything. He had trusted this man with everything. And the man had spent 11 months turning that trust into a weapon. Jae-won stood, moved to the window. The city was beginning to wake. Delivery vehicles, early commuters, the distant sound of the first subway trains running beneath the streets. He stood with his back to the room for a long moment. Then he turned around. And he looked at Zara Osei. I owe you an apology, he said. The directness of it surprised even Sorum. What I did tonight, what I did to you was wrong. I operated on incomplete information, made a unilateral decision, and treated you as a threat without verifying the premise. He stopped. Started again. In my world, certainty before action is a value I hold absolutely. Tonight I violated it, and the person who bore the consequence of that violation was you. He paused. I'm sorry. Zara studied him for a long moment. Do you apologize often?
No.
Is that relevant to how I should receive this one? That's your decision. She was quiet for several seconds. I accept it, she said finally. Conditionally. What condition? You cooperate fully with my investigation. All access, all documentation, no interference. If what you've told me about Changwol's purpose is true, the findings will reflect that. The truth is the truth. I don't manufacture conclusions. He held her gaze. Agreed. And she paused. You personally contact the KFIU this morning and correct the record regarding my clearance codes. Formally. In writing. Done. Sorum made a sound that might, in a different room, have been a laugh. At 6:47 a.m., while one of the analysts was running a deeper trace on the routing signature and Sorum was on a secure call with the firm's legal team, Jae-won poured 2 cups of coffee and placed one in front of Zara without asking.
She looked at it.
Then at him. You said you time everything, she said.
이도.
What are you timing now? He picked up his own cup. Considered the question with an honesty that seemed, to her, slightly unfamiliar to him, like a door he didn't often open. How long it takes to understand whether I can trust the instinct I'm having. What instinct? He looked out at the city, fully awake now, loud and moving and indifferent to everything that had happened in this building while it slept. He gestured vaguely, encompassing the documents and the screens and the two of them in the growing light, is the beginning of something rather than the end. Zara wrapped both hands around her cup. Begins as what? He turned to look at her directly. I don't know yet. That's what I'm timing. She considered that. Then, I should tell you, I'm not easy to work with. I'm thorough to the point where people find it frustrating. I document everything. I ask questions until I have answers, not approximations. I don't adjust my findings to accommodate what people want them to say. Neither do I. And, she added, I plan to find every cent that was diverted from those medical clinics and those scholarship students. Every cent regardless of where it leads. He nodded. I know. You're not concerned about where it might lead? I'm concerned about a great many things this morning, he said. The integrity of the investigation isn't one of them. The analyst across the room said quietly, Sir, I have a secondary signature match. Both of them turned. Tae-suk wasn't working alone. The room went still again, that particular stillness that descended when something already devastating found another layer beneath itself. Jae-won set down his cup. Zara pulled her tablet closer. The second name hadn't appeared yet on the screen. The analyst was still decrypting the associated routing data, and in that suspended moment, before the truth completed its arrival, Zara felt it. The particular weight of a story that was not close to over. Of a man standing to her left who had spent a night arresting the wrong person and was now, in the growing light of a Seoul morning, slowly understanding the full scale of what had been done to him. Of an investigation that had started as a professional contract and had become something far more personal, not because of him, not yet, but because of what was at stake. The clinics. The students. The promises made to people who had nothing else to rely on but the word of a man the world assumed was only dangerous. The analyst's screen resolved. The second name appeared. And Jae-won Seon, for the second time in one night, said something aloud that landed in the room like a wound. Zara looked at him. At the way something behind his eyes went very quiet and very cold at once. Who is that? She asked. He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was measured in the way that things are measured when the alternative is unraveling completely. My brother, he said. The money had always followed the betrayal. But the betrayal, it turned out, had always followed the love that curdled somewhere no one had thought to look. When the person who helped you build everything decides to watch it burn, what do you choose to save first? The truth, the people counting on you, or the part of yourself that still refuses to believe they could do it? Drop your answer below. And if this story is living in your chest right now, you already know why you're here.